Blocking my only way to the cabin? Are you kidding me? I shouted, slamming my hand on the steering wheel, staring dead on at the barricade jammed across the narrow dirt road. No signs, no warnings, just a makeshift wooden blockade and a scrawled note claiming maintenance closed until further notice. The HOA's handiwork, no doubt. Hi, I'm Ryan Mitchell. That cabin? It's more than just a place. It's my family's legacy. It belonged to my dad, a man who spent every summer out here by the lake, teaching me how to fish, fixing the old dock, and passing down stories that shaped who I am. After he passed last year, this cabin became my anchor, the last connection to him. And now these HOA bastards think they can just lock me out? Before I dive deeper, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop your town or city in the comments below. Stick around till the end, because what I'm about to share will expose exactly why those HOA types don't get to bully us anymore. Trust me, they're in for a reckoning they won't see coming. The morning sun cut through the trees as I parked my truck by the blocked road, trying to process what I was seeing. The lake, the water glistening just beyond the tree line, should have been calling me like it always did. But today, it felt like someone ripped the heart out of my summer ritual. I could almost hear my dad's voice, cracking jokes about my terrible casting skills or complaining about the stubborn dock nails that always gave him trouble. This cabin wasn't just real estate. It was history, memories, blood. I dialed the HOA president's number, Victoria Crane, on a whim. She answered after 2 rings, her voice cool, rehearsed. Ryan, I'm aware of the blockade. It's standard procedure for safety and repairs. You know the rules. Safety? I scoffed. There's no notice, no timeline. You just decided to shut me out? My family's cabin has one access road. Victoria, you're cutting me off? Her sigh was clipped. Procedures must be followed. We can't have unauthorized traffic. That's when I realized this wasn't about safety, it was power. In the weeks leading up to this, the HOA had been tightening screws all over. A letter about a parking violation here, a complaint about unauthorized decorations there. At first I thought it was just bureaucracy, annoying but manageable, but it soon became clear Victoria had it out for me, maybe because I questioned her at the last community meeting or because my family's history clashed with her vision for the neighborhood. I remembered how Dad fought similar battles decades ago when the cabin was first built. Neighbors complaining, the local council threatening permits. But Dad never backed down, and neither would I. Look, I told Victoria, this cabin is my last connection to my dad. If you think you're locking me out, you're locking me out of my own memories. There was a pause, then, I'm just enforcing the rules, Ryan. Enforcing rules or enforcing control? I wasn't about to find out the hard way. This was war, just not the kind with guns. It was about brains, patience, and legal know-how. Over the next few days, I began documenting everything. Pictures of the blockade, copies of notices that arrived mysteriously late or didn't arrive at all, and recordings of Victoria's vague threats to increase enforcement. I spoke quietly to a few neighbors, some sympathetic, others fearful, all uneasy with how the HOA. One afternoon while I sat by the lake, my dad's favorite spot, I found an old photo tucked into the wooden bench. It was Dad, grinning beside that very dock, a fishing rod in one hand and a half-caught bass in the other. The photo reminded me why this fight wasn't just about property lines. It was about preserving a legacy, defending a sanctuary. I had no illusions. Victoria Crane and her board had money, influence, and a small army of loyalists. But I had something they didn't: truth, resolve, and the will to fight smart. So, what happens next? How do you take on a group that thinks it can bully a family's history into oblivion? Well, buckle up, because it's going to get messy, tactical, and yes, a little satisfying when those HOA types finally get what's coming. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare or felt steamrolled by red tape, you'll want to watch this unfold. I promise you, this isn't just my story. It's a roadmap for anyone who's been pushed around by overzealous neighborhood watchdogs. But first, you've got to understand the battlefield, the little infractions, the veiled threats, and the quiet ways these organizations build their power until it feels impossible to fight back. That's where we're heading next. Stick with me. This cabin, and what it stands for, is worth every bit of trouble. The blockade wasn't just wood and nails, it was the first real line in the sand. After that call with Victoria Crane, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple fix. The next days felt like walking into a slow-moving trap. Letters arrived, thin envelopes with bolded demands, unauthorized parking, unapproved fence color, violation of community aesthetic. Each note was a tiny jab designed to wear me down. I walked the property, inspecting the cabin and the path leading to it, feeling the weight of every rule the HOA could throw at me. Victoria and her board wielded their power like it was a weapon, and every violation, real or imagined, was another round fired. What stung the most wasn't the accusations, but the way they tried to strip away the cabin's personality. The little things Dad had built over decades, the faded American flag on the porch, the hand-painted welcome sign, even the crooked birdhouse he nailed to a tree. To them, these were eyesores. To me, they were history. At the next HOA meeting, I decided to show up. Maybe face-to-face would help. Make them see I wasn't just a name on their complaint list. The room was sterile, cold, with a table arranged like a courtroom bench. Victoria sat front and center, her posture perfect, expression unreadable but sharp as a hawk. The board members flanked her like loyal sentries. I took a deep breath and stepped up. "Thank you for having me," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not here to fight, but to explain why this cabin means everything to me. It's not just property. It's my family's history. And these little changes, the roadblock, the fines, they're not just rules. They're cutting me out." Victoria's gaze was steady. "Ryan, the community has standards for a reason. We maintain the neighborhood's value and safety. Personal attachments don't exempt anyone." The crowd murmured. I caught a few sympathetic glances, but mostly wary faces. Victoria's allies sat stiffly, their arms crossed. It was clear they saw me as an outsider, a threat to their carefully curated order. One board member, a thin man named Charles, piped up, "Rules are rules. If you don't comply, penalties follow. That's how we keep this place livable." I shot back, "Do you really think safety and community come from locking people out without notice? My family built this place, fought for this land. You can't erase that with a pen." The tension thickened. Another member, Marissa, folded her arms. "We follow procedure, Ryan. Maybe it's time you do the same." I felt a flicker of frustration but swallowed it. This wasn't about yelling. It was chess, not checkers. I needed a strategy. Back home, I pulled out old photos Dad had kept. Grainy black and white images of the cabin's construction, newspaper clippings about permits granted decades ago, letters Dad wrote disputing earlier HOA complaints. Every piece was a thread connecting us to this land, evidence that this was our right as much as anyone's. I also started chatting with neighbors, some quietly offering support, others too scared to speak up openly. There was old Joe, the retired mechanic 2 houses down, who told me, "Victoria's got a way of squeezing folks until they crack. But you're different. You fight." Joe's words stuck. I wasn't just battling a board. I was standing for the community members who'd been cowed into silence. It added fuel to my fire. Then came the fines. $500, 0 cents here for an illegal structure, $1,200, 0 cents there for landscape violations. The numbers added up fast. The HOA sent letters threatening liens on the property if I didn't pay up or comply. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived with a notice of a special hearing, my final chance to appeal before the HOA took enforcement action. I glanced at the cabin from my office window, imagining the empty porch without Dad's old rocking chair. It was clear they wanted me out, not through a fair process, but through pressure and intimidation. So I called my lawyer. Meeting her was a turning point. Lisa Kim specialized in property rights and HOA battles, and her confidence was contagious. She flipped through the HOA's bylaws, highlighting vague clauses and procedural oversights. "They've got power," she said, "but not unlimited power. There are rules they must follow." Her words planted a seed of hope. This wasn't just a personal fight. It was a legal one, and I wasn't powerless. We discussed options, filing injunctions, demanding public records, even exposing HOA mismanagement to local media if it came to that. It was a long road ahead, but now I had a plan. That night, I sat by the lake, the same one Dad loved, feeling the breeze ripple across the water. The quiet was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my life. I thought about how Dad always said a man's got to stand for what's his, even if the world turns against him. This fight was my way of honoring him. And as the moonlight danced on the water, I promised myself I wouldn't let this injustice slide. Not for me, not for my family, and not for the others who'd been silenced. The HOA's rules might be sharp, but my resolve was sharper. The legal advice from Lisa Kim had settled into my mind like a spark waiting to ignite, but no amount of hope could soften the harsh reality staring me down the next morning. The road to my cabin was still blocked, and Victoria Crane wasn't budging. I pulled up to the barricade early, before any of the neighbors were awake. The rough-cut wood glistened with dew, the handwritten sign dangling loosely. Road closed for maintenance. Maintenance without a schedule, without contact, without notice. Typical HOA nonsense. I got out of my truck, pacing the narrow stretch of dirt road, tracing my fingers over the splintered wood. This wasn't just a blockade, it was a statement. An invisible line drawn not just across a path, but across my rights. That day, I made a decision. I wasn't walking away. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, I was ready to meet them at every turn. I called Lisa to update her. "They're firm on this blockade, no compromise," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. Lisa responded with calm certainty. "They're testing you, but remember their power is procedural. If they don't follow the rules exactly, their actions can be overturned." I felt a flicker of determination. So what's the first move? We file a motion to compel them to remove the blockade and provide a clear maintenance schedule. Plus, we gather as much evidence as possible to show their overreach. I hung up, feeling both the weight of the battle ahead and the flicker of hope. That afternoon, I started systematically documenting everything. Photos of the barricade from every angle, timestamps, and even drone footage from a friend who lived across the lake. The footage showed no construction crews, no equipment, just the blockade, unmoving. Meanwhile, I reached out to the neighborhood. At the local diner, I found Marcy, an elderly woman who had lived here for decades. Over coffee, she confided, "I've seen how Victoria runs things. If you don't push back, they steamroll you." Her story hit home. Marcy once tried planting flowers outside her porch, only to get slapped with a fine for non-compliant landscaping. She paid up but lost the joy of her garden. I realized this fight wasn't just mine. It was about reclaiming respect for everyone who called this place home. The next HOA meeting was looming, and I knew Victoria would be there, sharper than ever. I prepared my points, armed with facts, documents, and a growing coalition of supporters. When the night came, the community center was packed tighter than ever. Familiar faces dotted the crowd, some wary, some curious. Victoria took the floor first, her tone polished. "The blockade is necessary for safety. We will not tolerate unauthorized use of the road until repairs are complete." I stood up, voice steady. "With all due respect, Victoria, the blockade has been in place for over 2 weeks with no updates. Residents deserve transparency." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I glanced at Marcy, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Victoria's smile was thin. "Procedures are being followed. Anyone refusing to comply will face penalties." Charles, the thin board member from before, added, "Rules exist for the greater good. We must maintain order." I raised my hand. "Order? What about fairness? What about the right to access one's property without arbitrary roadblocks?" The room felt electric, the tension palpable. Victoria's supporters exchanged glances, but a few seemed uneasy. Then came the surprise. A neighbor, Tom, stood up. "I've lived here 20 years, and I've never seen the HOA act like this. Blocking access without clear reason, that's overreach." His words gave voice to the quiet frustration many felt but hesitated to express. Victoria's face tightened. "Mr. Tom, your personal opinions do not supersede community rules." The clash was raw and real. I could see the board faltering under the weight of public scrutiny. After the meeting, I approached a group of neighbors. "Thanks for speaking up," I said. "We're stronger together." They nodded, sharing stories of minor injustices, fines for holiday decorations, demands to remove vintage signs, constant inspections. I realized Victoria's reign was built on control, masked as community spirit. That night, back at the cabin, I sat by the fireplace Dad built. The flames flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts of past summers. I pulled out more old letters, Dad's meticulous notes to local authorities defending the cabin's existence and history. His persistence was a blueprint. He fought not just for land, but for dignity. I resolved to carry that torch forward. The following week, my lawyer filed the motion. I felt a surge of adrenaline watching the papers go in. Then came the retaliation. The HOA slapped me with a hefty fine, this time for an unauthorized structure, their term for the small shed Dad built years ago. Their moves were predictable but infuriating. Fought back with an appeal, providing proof that the shed had been grandfathered in legally decades before. The back and forth was draining, a war of paperwork and patience. Yet, every challenge sharpened my resolve. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the road, I noticed a new sign stuck in the ground. Trespassers will be prosecuted. No HOA name, no contact info, just a veiled threat. I called Victoria's office, demanding clarification. Her assistant offered only vague reassurances. I realized this wasn't just about rules anymore, it was intimidation. But I wasn't about to be scared off. Instead, I started setting up surveillance cameras, discreet but effective. The HOA needed to know someone was watching. The neighbors noticed the cameras and whispered their approval. This was no longer just my fight. It was becoming a community movement. Every photo, every video was a small victory in a growing battle for fairness. Victoria and her board had the power, but they underestimated what happens when people stand together. And as I stood beside the blockade one evening, watching the sunset bleed orange over the lake, I felt something unexpected. A surge of confidence. This fight wasn't just about a road or a cabin anymore, it was about standing up to bullies who thought they could rewrite the rules when no one was looking. And I was ready to rewrite those rules back. The cameras were my silent sentinels, watching over the blockade day and night, capturing every unauthorized move. It wasn't just about catching HOA's actions anymore, it was about sending a message. I wasn't backing down, and neither was the community. Lisa Kim and I met in her office to map out the next phase. She spread out the HOA bylaws across the table, highlighting obscure clauses that Victoria and her board had conveniently ignored. Bailey didn't follow the required notice period before the blockade, Lisa explained, and there's no official maintenance schedule on record. That gives us grounds to challenge their actions as illegal. I nodded, feeling the tide slowly turning. What else? We'll request all HOA meeting minutes, financial reports, and communications related to the road closure. Transparency might expose more of their overreach. With a clear legal plan, I dove into the paperwork. The HOA's digital archives weren't as pristine as they liked to pretend. Missing documents, conflicting dates, vague resolutions, each inconsistency was a chink in their armor. Meanwhile, I visited neighbors one by one, collecting stories and signatures for a petition demanding the road's reopening. Marcy brought me old letters where Victoria had overstepped, and Tom shared his own battles with unjust fines. These conversations weren't just about support. They were a reminder that the HOA's power wasn't absolute. One afternoon, I met with a local reporter interested in covering HOA abuses. "People love David versus Goliath stories," she said, eyes gleaming. "But we'll need solid proof." I handed over photos, videos, and legal filings, feeling the story gain momentum beyond our neighborhood. Back at the cabin, I found myself reflecting on Dad's tenacity. He'd faced town hall politics and corporate roadblocks with grit, never losing sight of what was right. I realized I was channeling his spirit, turning frustration into strategy. Then came the unexpected. A call from an HOA board member, Samuel, who'd been quiet in meetings. "I don't agree with how things are handled," he admitted cautiously. "Victoria's pushing too hard. If you want, I can share some inside info." It was a crack in their fortress. Samuel revealed that Victoria had fast-tracked the road closure without consulting the full board, ignoring objections from a few members. He hinted at hidden agendas, power plays, and financial incentives tied to property development. With his help, I pieced together a clearer picture of the HOA's motives. This wasn't about safety or community, it was about control and profit. Armed with new evidence, Lisa filed a formal complaint with the county's oversight agency, citing procedural violations and lack of transparency. Victoria's response was predictably defensive, painting me as a troublemaker disrupting neighborhood harmony. But the community was waking up. More neighbors attended meetings, demanding answers and fairness. I felt the balance shifting. One evening, as I walked along the shore, a family approached me, expressing gratitude. Their own small cabin had been under HOA scrutiny, and my fight gave them hope. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about standing up for everyone's rights. I thought about Dad again and the lessons he taught me, not just to endure but to fight smart. Victoria might have the power of position, but I had something stronger: community and truth. The roadblock might still stand, but cracks were appearing in the HOA's armor. And I was ready to keep pushing until those cracks became a collapse. The moment the County Oversight Agency acknowledged our complaint, I sensed a shift in the wind. This wasn't just paperwork, it was validation. The board was under scrutiny, and Victoria's tight grip was loosening. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Shortly after, the HOA sent me a notice, a fine so steep it looked more like a ransom demand. Unauthorized modifications to property, it claimed, pointing to a small weathered bench on my porch that Dad had built years ago. I stared at it, the bench that had held countless afternoons of laughter and quiet reflection. To them, it was a violation. I called Lisa. "They're ramping up the pressure," I said. She sighed. "That's their playbook, intimidate and overwhelm. But we have options." I filed an appeal providing proof that the bench was a long-standing fixture, exempt from recent HOA restrictions. The process was exhausting, a back-and-forth dance of forms, hearings, and endless patience. Meanwhile, the neighborhood felt like a powder keg. Loyalists of Victoria whispered warnings while others voiced quiet support. I caught sideways glances at the grocery store, half sympathy, half curiosity. One evening, as I walked past the barricade, I noticed fresh graffiti scrawled on the wood, "Know your place." It wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. Instead of fear, a spark of defiance lit inside me. I shared the photo with Lisa. "We need to document this as harassment." She agreed, adding it to the growing dossier. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were waging a campaign to break me. But every attempt to intimidate only steeled my resolve. I started hosting informal gatherings at the cabin. Neighbors came, bringing stories, frustrations, and a growing sense of unity. Old Joe, once a silent observer, now told tales of past HOA battles, reminding us we weren't the first to fight, and certainly not the last. At one gathering, Marcy handed me a faded newspaper clipping. It detailed how previous HOA presidents had been ousted for similar abuses of power. "This place has a history of standing up," she said. "You're just the latest chapter." Her words echoed in my mind. Back at the cabin, I refined my strategy. Lisa and I prepared for a mediation session with the HOA, hoping to find common ground, but deep down, I knew Victoria wouldn't concede easily. The mediation day arrived, tension palpable in the air. Victoria was composed but icy. "We're here to find a solution that respects community standards," she declared. I responded firmly. "Respecting standards doesn't mean trampling rights. My family's cabin deserves access and dignity." The discussion was heated but civil. Victoria floated vague timelines for road repairs but offered no guarantees. I countered with legal points, exposing procedural errors and demanding accountability. After hours of back and forth, the mediator suggested a temporary compromise: partial road access during daytime, pending further inspections. It wasn't a win, but it was a crack in the blockade. Leaving the meeting, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. The fight was far from over. That night I sat by the fire pit, thinking about Dad's relentless spirit. He never gave up, even when the odds were stacked. I knew I couldn't either. The HOA had thrown everything at me: fines, threats, intimidation. But I was holding firm. And with the community rallying behind me, Victoria's reign of control was slipping. I glanced out the window toward the road. The barricade still stood, but now, beneath the graffiti and nails, I saw hope. The battle for the cabin wasn't just mine, it was ours. The partial access promised after mediation felt like a thin veil over the barricade. An opening, yes, but with limits designed to frustrate. Driving the dusty road by day was a small victory, but after sunset, the blockade still loomed, a reminder that the fight was far from over. Lisa warned me that the HOA would likely dig in, so it was time to prepare for a legal showdown. Weeks of preparation followed. We gathered every piece of evidence: the graffiti photos, emails with vague promises, witness statements from neighbors who'd endured similar tactics. My little surveillance cameras recorded the blockade's every move, proving no maintenance crews ever came near. I spent long nights poring over documents, matching dates, cross-referencing HOA bylaws with local property laws. It was tedious, exhausting, but I felt sharp, focused, like a chess player anticipating moves 5 steps ahead. One afternoon, Lisa came by with a confident smile. "I've filed the lawsuit. It challenges the blockade's legality and demands damages for your loss of access. This is serious." The reality hit me. The fight was no longer just a nuisance, it was a battle for justice. Word spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors approached, hesitant but supportive. Old Joe brought over his own HOA fines from years past, calling them war stories. "It's a marathon, kid," he chuckled, "not a sprint." That humor lightened the weight of the moment. The first court date was a tense blur. Lisa and I arrived early, papers in hand, ready for a fight. Victoria and the HOA's legal counsel were there, faces tight, eyes calculating. The judge listened carefully as Lisa laid out the facts: improper procedure, lack of transparency, and the blockade's undue burden on my property rights. Victoria's lawyer argued HOA's right to maintain safety and community standards, painting me as a disruptive force. I watched the exchange, heart pounding but steady. In the break, a neighbor who had attended the hearing approached me quietly. "We're behind you. You're doing what's right." That support fueled my resolve. Back at the cabin, I noticed small acts of kindness: a basket of fresh eggs left at the porch, a handwritten note of encouragement slipped under the door. Community was rallying, quietly but powerfully. But the HOA wasn't done. A week later, another fine arrived, this time for exceeding allowed daytime road use. Absurd, given the limited hours granted. Lisa laughed it off. "They're grasping at straws, but it's harassment." I started documenting every letter, every email, preparing for the next legal step. Meanwhile, I took to the community center's bulletin board, posting updates on the lawsuit and inviting neighbors to meetings. Marcy showed up one night, her eyes bright. "It feels good to stand up again," she said. "You've given us hope." That moment reminded me why this fight mattered beyond my own cabin. One evening, while walking the road, I noticed a small group of teenagers spray painting over the hateful graffiti. A neighbor joined them, wiping away the scrawled threat with a smile. It was a small act, but symbolic, a reclaiming of space, dignity. As the lawsuit progressed, I learned to balance frustration with patience. Victoria sent her usual curt emails, veiled threats replaced by legal jargon. But I wasn't intimidated. I had Lisa, the community, and Dad's stubborn spirit behind me. And I knew that sometimes justice wasn't just about winning a single battle, it was about showing bullies they couldn't silence you. That fight was just getting started. The lawsuit was no longer just a piece of paper, it had become a beacon, a rallying point for a neighborhood long silenced by Victoria's iron grip. The HOA board was visibly rattled, and rumors circulated that cracks were forming in their ranks. One afternoon, I received a call from Samuel, the quiet board member who'd shared inside information months earlier. His voice was low but urgent. "Ryan, there's something you should know. Victoria's pushing through a new proposal. Selling a portion of common land near the lake to a developer. It's behind closed doors, but it'll change everything." That revelation hit me like a punch. It wasn't just about the road or the cabin anymore. It was about greed masked as governance. I thanked Samuel and immediately called Lisa. If that land sale goes through, it could cut off access permanently. Lisa's tone turned sharp. "We need to get ahead of this. Request all HOA meeting records on the sale. If they're hiding things, we expose it." Within days, we filed formal requests for documentation, but the HOA dragged their feet, providing partial and vague responses. That only confirmed our suspicions. At the next neighborhood meeting, I presented what little we'd uncovered. The room buzzed with disbelief and anger. Tom, ever outspoken, slammed his fist on the table. "They're selling our community piece by piece. This isn't leadership, it's theft." Victoria responded with practiced calm. "The sale is necessary for financial stability. It benefits all residents." Her words fell flat. Marcy leaned over. "They're trying to rush this before anyone notices." The tension exploded when a board member voiced quiet dissent. "Victoria's pushing this without full approval. It's unethical." The room erupted in murmurs. I seized the moment. If the board is bypassing proper procedures, that sale is invalid, and so are the blockade and fines linked to it. Victoria's facade cracked, her voice rising. "Enough! This meeting is adjourned!" But the damage was done. Back at the cabin, the weight of the battle pressed down, but the neighborhood was awake now, eyes wide open. I organized a petition demanding transparency on the land sale and an immediate halt to the road blockade. Hundreds signed. The media caught wind and a local reporter called for comment. I explained how the HOA's actions were more than petty enforcement. They were a power grab, threatening the community's heart. Victoria's response was predictably defensive but shaky. Meanwhile, Lisa prepared motions challenging the legality of the land sale and highlighting the procedural irregularities in the blockade. The court dates piled up, but so did support. One evening, Marcy handed me a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing when others feared to speak." It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of generations. I realized this fight wasn't just mine. It was for every neighbor whose voice had been drowned out. Victoria escalated, sending official warnings to neighbors who signed the petition, threatening fines and legal action. But fear was no longer an option. The community met that weekend, a mix of anger, determination, and hope filling the air. Old Joe, with his gravelly voice, reminded us they think power means silence, but power's in numbers and truth. The barricade remained, but now it symbolized something different: resistance. And as I looked over the crowd, I felt the momentum shifting. This was no longer a battle between one man and an HOA. It was a stand for fairness, transparency, and community. And Victoria Crane's reign was crumbling, one small victory at a time. Victoria's grip on the community was slipping, but she wasn't ready to surrender. The latest HOA newsletter arrived like a loaded salvo, threatening stricter enforcement, increased fines, and vague hints of legal action against anyone opposing the board. The language was formal, but the message was clear: back down or pay the price. Instead of retreating, I saw an opportunity. If the HOA was so intent on control, why not flip the script and use their own rules against them? With Lisa's help, I began researching alternative access rights, easements, shared pathways, and legal loopholes. It turned out there was a rarely enforced easement just beyond the barricaded road, technically public access, but long ignored by the HOA. I set to work transforming that neglected path into a functional alternative. With permission from the local county, I installed a modest gate, complete with a small toll booth. It wasn't about money, it was about asserting control where the HOA thought none existed. Neighbors watched with mixed surprise and amusement when I unveiled the gate. "So you're charging the HOA for access now?" Marcy joked. "Karma's got a new address." I laughed. "It's not about the money. It's about making sure they know who holds the keys." Victoria's reaction was swift and predictably furious. Board emails flooded my inbox. Accusations of unauthorized constructions, threats to file complaints, and warnings about violating community rules. I responded calmly, armed with documentation of the easement's legality and county permits. Victoria's threats felt hollow against the weight of law and community support. The gate became more than a symbol. It was a tangible reminder that power isn't given, it's earned and maintained through accountability. One afternoon, Victoria showed up in person, flanked by a small group of board members. She stood by the gate, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You've crossed a line, Ryan," she hissed. "This is our neighborhood, and you're jeopardizing community order." I met her gaze steadily. This community belongs to all of us, not just a select few. If that means sharing access, so be it. Their faces tightened, but there was no easy rebuttal. Over the next weeks, the alternative access route gained traction. Neighbors began using it, grateful for a way around the blockade. The old barricade, once a menacing wall, now seemed like a relic, outmaneuvered by a community refusing to be silenced. Lisa prepared the final legal documents, building a strong case to present in court, highlighting the HOA's procedural failures and abuse of power. Meanwhile, the community organized. Monthly meetings filled with growing numbers, discussions ranging from HOA reforms to neighborhood improvement projects. The energy was contagious. One evening, as I stood by the new gate watching the sun dip behind the lake, Marcy approached, a warm smile on her face. "You've changed the game," she said. "We're not just fighting anymore, we're winning." Her words echoed the feelings swelling inside me. Victoria's tight control was breaking, replaced by transparency, community spirit, and justice. The cabin wasn't just a building anymore. It was a beacon of resistance and hope. And as the gate swung open, welcoming neighbors instead of blocking them, I knew this was more than a victory. It was a new beginning. The new gate was a game changer. Victoria's worst nightmare realized, but as the old saying goes, bullies don't give up easily. What followed was a campaign of covert sabotage and psychological warfare designed to wear me down. It started small. One morning, I found the gate's lock tampered with, scratched and forced but still holding. Nearby, fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the gravel, suspiciously late at night. I reported it to the local authorities, but it was clear. Whoever did this wanted me to know they were watching, waiting. Then came the anonymous notes slipped under my door, warnings to stop stirring trouble or face consequences. Instead of fear, those threats fueled my resolve. I shared the notes with Lisa, who advised documenting everything meticulously. "Harassment is part of the HOA's playbook," she said. "We'll use it against them." The community felt the tension too. At the next neighborhood gathering, whispers spread about strange cars lurking near the gate, strange voices late at night. Tom, ever vigilant, set up additional motion-sensitive lights and cameras. Old Joe handed me a flashlight with a wry grin. Time to shine some light on these shadows. The atmosphere was tense, but our unity grew stronger. We weren't just neighbors anymore, we were a front. Victoria's board doubled down, issuing fines to anyone using the new gate, including longtime residents. Letters arrived threatening liens and legal action, drumming up fear. But the community's spirit was unbroken. Marcy stood up during a meeting, voice steady but fierce. "We will not be bullied by threats and fines. This neighborhood deserves fairness." Her words sparked applause and renewed determination. Meanwhile, I focused on the court case. Lisa dug deeper, uncovering emails showing Victoria orchestrated much of the intimidation, trying to isolate me and silence opposition. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the tone shifted. Victoria's legal team faltered, unable to justify the blockade or the harassment campaign. The courtroom became a stage for truth. During the final hearing, I took a moment to speak, not just as a plaintiff, but as a voice for the community. "This fight is about more than a road or a gate," I said. "It's about standing up when faced with power used to intimidate and exclude. It's about protecting our homes, our memories, and our dignity." The judge's eyes held a quiet respect. Victoria's facade cracked further in the following weeks. Board members began resigning quietly, unwilling to be part of the unraveling drama. Neighbors who once whispered in fear now spoke openly. One evening, as I stood near the gate, a group of children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. It struck me how this fight wasn't just about me. It was about preserving the community's soul for generations to come. And despite the scars and struggles, that was a victory no one could take away. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. After months of battling behind legal briefs and neighborhood meetings, the day had come for the final showdown. Victoria Crane sat rigid, her usual composure slipping like sand through her fingers. Lisa handed me a folder thick with documents. Our arsenal, every piece of evidence painstakingly gathered, emails, photos, testimonies. I felt the weight of the community behind me, their hopes and frustrations distilled into this moment. The judge called the session to order, eyes sharp, voice steady. Victoria's lawyer began with rehearsed arguments about community standards and safety concerns, but Lisa was ready, systematically dismantling each claim with cold facts and procedural flaws. When my turn came, I rose, heart steady but voice firm. "This fight started with a simple roadblock," I began, but it quickly became about respect, fairness, and the right to protect one's home and family legacy. I glanced at the crowd, the neighbors who had shown up in support, some waving discreet signs, others simply watching with quiet smiles. Victoria's face tightened as I continued. The blockade was imposed without proper procedure, denying access to my family's property and breaking trust with the community. Attempts to intimidate and silence dissent through fines and threats only strengthened our resolve. I laid out the timeline: mediation attempts, ignored documents, the covert land sale, the harassment campaign. The judge listened intently, occasionally nodding. Victoria tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. "Let the plaintiff finish." When I concluded, a hush settled. The judge's voice broke the silence. The evidence presented shows a pattern of procedural neglect and misuse of authority. He ruled that the HOA must remove the blockade immediately, void all fines related to the dispute, and halt any land sales until proper community consultations occurred. The room erupted in quiet applause. Victoria's shoulders slumped. Her reign of control was crumbling. Back at the cabin, the news felt surreal but earned. I stood on the porch, breathing in the scent of pine and lake breeze, the sun casting golden hues over the water. Neighbors gathered nearby, sharing smiles and congratulations. Marcy handed me a fresh batch of her homemade cookies, her eyes glistening. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." That victory wasn't just legal, it was personal, a restoration of dignity, a reclaiming of community spirit. In the following days, the barricade came down, the road was open again, not just for me, but for everyone. The toll booth was dismantled, replaced by a simple sign welcoming all. Victoria resigned, her departure a quiet acknowledgement of defeat. The neighborhood began healing, the wounds of division slowly closing. I thought about Dad, who always said a man's home is where his heart fights hardest. This fight had tested that truth and proved it stronger than any blockade or bully. As the sun set over the lake, laughter and conversation filled the air once more. The cabin stood proud, a symbol not just of family, but of resilience and justice. And as night fell, I knew the fight had ended not with anger, but with hope. With the courtroom victory behind us and Victoria's resignation marking the end of an era, the neighborhood exhaled a collective breath it had been holding for months. But the work wasn't over. Winning in court was just the beginning of rebuilding trust, community, and a shared sense of fairness. The following weekend, we organized a block party by the lake, a simple celebration of resilience and new beginnings. I watched families gather, kids chasing each other around picnic tables, neighbors exchanging stories and laughter. It was a scene Dad would have loved. Pure, unfiltered joy. Marcy pulled me aside, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You know, Ryan, this fight wasn't just about a road or fines. It was about standing up for what's right, for our dignity. You reminded us that silence isn't an option." Her words echoed the sentiment shared by many. The cabin, once a symbol of division, had become a beacon of unity. In the weeks after the party, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. New leadership was elected, neighbors who understood the importance of transparency and community engagement. Meetings became forums for open discussion, not platforms for intimidation. I was invited to speak at the first revamped meeting, sharing lessons from our battle. Standing before familiar faces, I spoke plainly. Respect is earned through fairness, not fear. Our neighborhood thrives when we listen and include every voice. The applause was genuine and heartfelt. Meanwhile, practical changes were underway. The road was repaired and maintained through a community fund, overseen by a diverse committee. Restrictions loosened, allowing homeowners to personalize their spaces without fear of arbitrary fines. One afternoon, while fixing the old dock Dad built, a young family approached. The father handed me a photo album filled with pictures of their summer visits, a tradition they hoped to continue for decades. It was a quiet reminder that the fight preserved more than land, it preserved memories. I thought back to those early days, the letters, the meetings, the blockade. The frustration that threatened to overwhelm was tempered now by the sight of neighbors rebuilding bridges. Yet the journey also taught me about the quiet strength in community. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about nurturing a space where fairness, respect, and kindness prevailed. At the cabin, the porch light glowed warmly as dusk settled. I sat in Dad's old rocking chair, the gentle creak a comforting rhythm. A soft breeze carried the laughter of children playing nearby, and for the first time in a long while, peace felt real. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a triumph for everyone who believes in standing up, speaking out, and fighting smart. And as the stars appeared overhead, I knew the legacy we defended would shine brightly for generations to come. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lake as I sat on the porch, the familiar creak of Dad's rocking chair under me grounding every thought. The cabin felt alive again, not just with memories, but with the promise of the future. But looking back on the journey, it was clear this fight wasn't just about a blocked road or petty HOA rules. It was about standing up for what's yours when the system tries to push you aside. About dignity, family legacy, and community. The neighbors had transformed too. What began as whispered fears and hushed conversations turned into open support and shared purpose. We were no longer isolated individuals caught in a power struggle. We were a united front. I caught Marcy at the community garden, her hands dirt-streaked but her smile radiant. "You sparked something here," she said. "Not just a fight, but a movement." Her words stuck with me. Even Victoria's old allies had shifted, realizing that community thrives on respect, not domination. The new HOA leadership promised transparency and fairness, a direct response to the battle we fought together. One afternoon, I found a letter in the mailbox. No threats, no fines, just an invitation, a community picnic to celebrate the neighborhood's new chapter. I knew then the victory was more than legal. It was emotional and deeply personal. That night, sitting under the stars, I thought about Dad's lessons, not just how to fish or build a dock, but how to stand firm when it matters most. The cabin, the lake, the land, they're all part of a legacy worth defending. And if you're watching this, caught in your own battle with an HOA or any overreach, remember, it's not just about the rules. It's about knowing your worth and having the courage to fight smart. Stay patient, stay strategic, and when the moment's right, strike with everything you've got. Because sometimes the quietest resistance is the most powerful. And trust me, those HOA bastards won't know what hit them. If you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, drop a comment below and share where you're watching from. Let's build a community that stands up together.